All right, macros. This will be a quick one today. We're just going to do this ed puzzle, couple practice questions at the end of it, and that's it. So we're kind of gearing up to study for the test and the exam. So I'm going to make this week fairly easy for you. Okay. This is actually something we've talked about before, right? So one of the things that we talk when we talk about growth and standard of living, we don't really use nominal GDP because it doesn't account for inflation. But we wouldn't, for standard of living, we wouldn't count real GDP either because it doesn't account for the population. You could have a high real GDP, but 10 billion people, you're going to have a pretty low GDP per capita. So per capita GDP is what we look at when we divide the real GDP by the population. Another thing we look at is growth rate. So the change in real GDP per capita over time shows a healthy productive growth rate of a country. All right. So there are characteristics of countries with high growth rates. We'll talk about it a little bit here. Okay. So you can see here, this is a good example of countries with high GDP per capita and high growth rates. In the middle of that picture, you see a dark spot. It looks like it's part of the sea, but that's actually just North Korea. And you can see the countries around it have high real GDPs and are a lot of times more productive. And you can see the benefits that they reap there. This is just these countries at night, but North Korea would be a good example of a country that has a low growth rate. So why do some countries have more growth? Well, one is the economic systems. Okay, now this isn't certainly true for everything. It's not a mixture of things, but typically countries that have higher growth rates are capitalist. Okay, now a big part of that is everybody does business with capitalist countries and no one does business with communist countries, which certainly hurts their growth rate. But capitalist systems promotes innovation, provides incentives, and a lot of times allows for more productivity. It's also good to have rule of law. So countries that are stable, solid institutions, and don't have big overturns of their political systems typically have more growth. Countries that just have more machines and tools, so capital stock. Human capital, we've talked about that. Human capital is human beings that are experts that allow for growth and productivity and quality, right? It's my sushi chef example. So if you had a sushi restaurant and you wanted your sushi chefs at your restaurant to be more productive, you might hire a master sushi chef to show them how to be better. That would be human capital because it's leading to better production. And then, of course, if you just have natural resources in the land that you own, it certainly helps. All right. But you could have all of these things and not be very productive. So productivity is the output per unit of input. So this is kind of a micro function. So if you took microeconomics or will be taking microeconomics, this is a pretty key concept here. So understand that your physical capital is fixed, right? Unless you change it, okay? But you are going to be more productive marginally, right? So additionally, if you add somebody to that fixed input or that fixed resource, right? That capital good. The more people that you add, though, the less productive you'll be over time, and eventually you'll have negative returns to that production. So again, if we're in a kitchen making pizza, right? It's probably helpful to have an additional person, okay? And you're going to be more productive. You're going to make more pizzas. And it might even be better to have another person, right? Those 3 people. But how productive are you going to be marginally and additionally if you're at your 100th person in a small kitchen? You're not going to be. It's going to be counterproductive. So because of that, you have kind of that flattening of the curve that you see there. All right. So as you add people to fixed resources, you eventually get these diminishing marginal returns. Okay, so productivity levels will level off because of diminishing marginal returns. All right. But if you decide to improve your technology, so we decide to, okay, let's get a bigger kitchen with more ovens, right? Then you can be more productive. Okay, and if you get an even bigger kitchen with even more ovens, then you can be more productive as well. Okay, so just because you hire more people doesn't mean you're going to be more productive, right? And that's what we see on the aggregate as well, right? So what we need in a lot of ways is an increase in investment spending that will lead to more production. Okay, so what happens in the short run and the long run? So if investment increases, all right, so this is what shifts long run aggregate supply, right? And you got your production possibilities curves, and it's easy because whatever shifts the PPC is going to shift your long run aggregate supply. So your aggregate demand shifts, and it shifts because of investment spending or capital stock investment spending. Okay, so machinery and tools purchased by businesses that increase their output. Okay, in the long run, typically what we see is aggregate supply would decrease in the long run back to long run aggregate supply, but because you're more productive, aggregate supply will increase, and this will increase your long run aggregate supply. All right, so capital stock, machinery, tools, all that kind of stuff. So an increase in consumption or net exports doesn't cause economic growth. That's a big important thing. It's only going to be investment spending. So investment causes growth since firms increase their physical capital. Now, it could be government spending in capital stock, which would increase, that could potentially increase long run aggregate supply. But the big thing is that capital stock would be increasing. So here's an answer for you, or question. Here's your next question. And your next. All right. And we've done this one before, but take a couple minutes again to do this on a piece of paper. And then if you could, write your answers or type the answers that could need to be typed into the question. So take a second to do that. Here's the answer. Big thing is with this one that we didn't talk about previously is that I think for C, 1 point is earned for stating that real wages will fall because price level has increased. So an increase in price level is inflation. If wages are sticky and inflation went up, then your real wages would probably decrease at that point. Okay. And then, of course, the long run, you don't have to show the long run, but you would certainly have to explain that it would shift. And then this is a Unit 1 question, just a little recap for you. So take a second to do this. Here's your answer. If you did a bowed out PPC, that's totally fine. Okay. And then again, remembering comparative advantage in terms of trade. So this was an output question, so it'd be other over. And then the last one says that any units of capital between 20 and 40. This one's hard to explain, again, if you don't remember, but basically think about it this way, that once you did the initial math for that, the other over, you'd find that Sweden, who would specialize in food, Sweden would lose 20 units of capital for every food that they would produce. So if they produced 10 foods, then they would lose 20 capital goods. So if they want to exchange, they would do anything above 20. Okay? Norway, though, is better off doing it themselves if they traded for anything above 40. So any number between 20 and 40 would be the answer that you would get for E. Okay? And that's it.